Welcome to Survey Booker Sessions. Tune in to hear from people working in a range of industries and roles to provide you ideas that you can take away and use in your own business. I'm your host, Matt Nally, the founder and director of Survey Booker, which is the leading CRM and survey management system for surveyors. On this week's episode, we have Steve Hodgson from Steve Hodgson Building Consulting. So thank you very much for coming on.
No problem, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here.
Do you want to introduce yourself first, and then I'll come on to sort of, what we're covering today?
Oh gosh, I hate this sort of thing. My name's Steve Hodgson. I've been around sort of the damp control industry in one form or another since I was 19 years old, and sort of after a decade in contracting, I went to the Property Care Association, and a bit of greasy pole climbing and a bit of backstabbing. I ended up being the CEO, and I left that position in November last year, and I've really gone back to what I think I was always made to do, which is kind of rooting around in buildings and taking all the things that I've learned for all those years at the PCA, learning from other people's mistakes, and applied them to my own business now. So yeah, I'm out on my own and loving every minute of it.
Awesome. Well, one of the things I know you covered quite a lot, or correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure you did, was spray foam. And I wanted to come back to this because I know it's been a topic historically that's been covered quite a lot, and then like everything, something else comes up, like rat concrete or I don't know, new standards. Something gets in the way of the noise around it. And interestingly, it's popped up again this week in the news with the reports of lenders not lending on homes with spray foam. So I think across the episode we'll talk about types of spray foam and removals and the future of it. But so should we start with that piece that's just come out around people not lending, and then come on to the types of spray foam and risks and realities around it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was approached by a journalist probably about 3 months ago originally, who was interested because it's been kicking around. It's never really gone away, and people are being affected by it. And consumer protection programs are getting calls from concerned consumers who feel as though they've been ripped off in various ways and are struggling to sell or process their properties or raise capital. So a journalist gave me a call and asked if I could provide them with any sort of technical background and chat about it. What was kind of interesting about this one is that she approached it by speaking to the top 20 lenders and finding out what their attitude towards polyurethane foam was. And she found that pretty much everybody said that they would deal with it. They would lend on it. But actually, when it really came down to it, when you looked inside the story, the limitations and the expectations of those lenders meant that really there's only 3 or 4 that would sort of actively sort of without reservation accept the information that was being provided and provide loans. But the underlying sort of story here is that lenders, and particularly equity release lenders, are still incredibly nervous of the long term, as well as some of the short term implications of badly designed and badly installed polyurethane foam.
That's an interesting note you make there. Is badly designed, badly installed. Is that to say then actually the headline you get of all spray foam is bad, to simplify it? Is that a valid statement, valid claim?
No, Matt, absolutely no. It's not. It's not valid, and it's not correct, and it's not helpful either. Polyurethane foam is okay. Let's sort of dispel a few myths. I'm not anti-foam. I'm not anti-polyurethane. As a concept and as a product, it's absolutely brilliant because it does everything that it says on the tin. You can't blame a product for being used inappropriate. It does fill gaps. It does allow you to have a choice between materials that are highly moisture resistant where you want it to be, and highly vapor resistant in other places, while being an extremely good insulator and being dimensionally very stable and chemically very stable. So it has lots of really, really, really good attributes. And what's unfair and unjustified is saying that all polyurethane foam in all situations is a bad idea. It has some incredibly useful applications. I looked at a property only last week for a gentleman who had spent nearly £1.5 million completely remodeling his house, and as part of an architect design solution for energy performance, the roof was completely full of polyurethane foam. But what was inside that was an air management system that meant that there was no risk of vapor drive through this material, and the correct materials had been used, so the correct type of foam in the correct installations. And yet he was trying to raise some money on a building that he owned outright, and was told by a valuer that for mortgage purposes, his very expensive house was being given a zero valuation for mortgage purposes. Now, what's kind of interesting is, and what's useful, and where I, still enjoy getting to grips with PU foam, is being able to go to a property like that and being able to do the work and do the observations to absolutely show a lender that this is not a problem. And actually, perversely, if you damage the foam, if you take the foam out, you'll actually have a fundamentally ruining effect on the building, because you'll damage its ability to handle moisture, and you also damage its ability to handle heat as well. So, in a situation like that, this gentleman was running around like a headless chicken, wondering whether he's going to have to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds taking his roof off. And the truth was, damaging the foam would have absolutely mullered all the work that he'd done. It would be far bigger than just the roof. So there's lots of installations that are right and correct, and there's lots of uses of the foam in particular situations that work. So it's not a bad product. It's a product that has, unfortunately, in some cases, been used poorly and inappropriately, and installed despite or because of an idea of driving sales rather than driving quality in some areas, and that's what's killed it. That's what's hurt the product.
Yeah, and on the flip side, you've now got the other industry coming up of the removal side, and again, that's got to be done in the right way. If it might be an appropriate installation, someone's coming in to remove it, but that's possibly something for later.
Well, Matt, you say it's for later, but it's useful to say that anybody who knocks on your door telling you that they're going to evaluate the foam in the roof is probably not going to do that. They're going to give you a price for removal, irrespective of what they find. And that it is worth mentioning at this point, because it's really the dark side of what's going on at the moment, and the very negative byproduct of actually trying to set the clock straight on what's good and what's bad, is that there are people moved in taking advantage of that negative publicity and ripping people off again. But perhaps we should park it there and
come back to maybe a bit later on.
Go on to it when you feel like it.
Perfect. I suppose around the sort of installation and so on, is all spray foam bad in terms of the actual type of spray foam and the different types, and is it mainly then just down to installation that's the problem, or is it something else?
No, neither of those things really. I'm not going to be drawn into vilifying any one type of foam.
No.
I guess that it's maybe worthwhile sort of going back to sort of the 80s, and where I first encountered spray foam, not knowing anything like what I know now, but encountered spray foam in the sort of mean streets of Backstreet Leeds, where I was doing condition reports and timber and damp inspections as a contractor, and going into roof voids of old terraced houses and finding polyurethane foam glued to the back of tiles. Now, it was, when it first appeared and certainly came onto my radar, it was being used as a means of extending the life of a failing roof. And so there's a whole bunch of work done almost from the late 80s right through the 90s, where the principal use of polyurethane foam was a hard cell foam to extend the life of a roof that was on its way out. So the claims were things like, we can apply this material, we'll give you a 25-year guarantee, your roof will be maintenance free, everything's great. And to be fair, it's a little bit like, and I'm making myself unpopular by saying so, it's a bit like the rack thing, isn't it? Rack was only ever supposed to be a short-term fix, a cheap short-term fix to an issue. And, build me something that will last 25 years and then complaining after it's gone wrong after 50 is probably a little bit of a head melt. Well, actually, this product has done exactly what it said it was going to do for 25 years, glued the roof together. The problem is now that we're coming to the end of that period, and those roofs are leaky, and they're still at the end of their design life. And when water gets in to, in front, if you will, or behind a hard cell polyurethane foam system, which is intrinsically vapor resistant and incredibly good at being waterproof, then any water that gets in is held against the rafters, and that leads and can lead to accelerated decay in a roof. So it's not easy, however, to just say hard cell foam is bad. Hard cell foam used as a glue to stick a roof together doesn't feel, as a surveyor and somebody who thinks about moisture and timber moisture and how they relate, like a good idea. Nor does kind of trying to fix a leak from the inside of from the wrong side of a leaking system. It doesn't feel like the right thing to do. So it's not that the foam is bad. It's just that using a waterproof foam on a leaky roof where you've got timber in the way just seems like a dumb thing to do. So scroll forward to 2024 with those sorts of installations, it's not really surprising that surveyors acting on behalf of purchasers would caution against buying a roof that they know they've had a short-term fix done on it and that's probably coming to the end of its life and is very, very vulnerable to leaking water. So on that side of things, that whole kind of historic, if you like, reservoir of old installs using hard cell foam probably need to be cycled out. They don't know probably about it. They should be. Was it ever a good idea? Probably not. And right, it was a dumb idea. But could you be blamed for buying it if you were a relatively technically ignorant consumer being told that you can put off spending tens of thousands of pounds on a new roof by squirting some foam around the inside that was going to glue it all together and give you a happy life for a bit? So you kind of dealt with that really roughly and quite dismissively as part from hard cell foam. What then happened was that the insulative qualities of the foam came to the fore. The issues with hard cell foam were lurking about, but then we started using open cell foam primarily as an insulative material. And if you look at in detail at the manufacturer's own product approval certificates from both the British Board of Agreement and Kiwa, there is an understanding, even in those earliest documents, that you have to be careful. Because, day one, lesson one at building college when I was probably 19 years old, went something along the lines of you don't put vapor permeable insulation or a vapor barrier on the cold side of insulation, because if you do, you get a problem. So there was already a recognition, even in the earliest certificates, of condensation risk with that sort of buildup of materials. So there was an understanding that you should be applying vapor permeable foam to vapor permeable backings, and also consider the amount of vapor drive into the roof and how the roof is going to manage it. So if everything had been done as those data sheets required, and as the very good contractors knew and recognized, we wouldn't have a problem. But unfortunately, the kind of the interpretation of what could and should be done kind of got mixed up. And then we had lots of entries into the market where actually, well, we can do this. We can apply soft cell insulating foam, converting cold roofs into warm roofs. We can get a bit of a gallop on here. We're making lots of money. We're actually improving the thermal values of some people's homes. There doesn't seem to be a bad side of applying this foam to bitumen fibre felts. But actually, there kind of always was. The problem is that, as the BRE, HSE rather, document that was published just before Easter proved that some properties with that inappropriate buildup of vapor permeable foam applied either directly to the primary roof coverings or to a vapor barrier does start to generate problems in some buildings. So the cold feet, if you like, that surveyors had started to get about this kind of theoretical and practical moisture risk because of the incorrect location of vapor barriers started to manifest itself originally with, and as far as I could see, with the equity release companies. And the equity release companies understood that long-term, chronic risk. And, should we be lending on a building where our stake in that building grows with time? when there is this potential for a defect that at the point at which we take control of that building, one of the major construction elements may be compromised. So they walked away from it first. And that really meant, in my own interpretation of what happened, is that the rest of the valuation and mortgage market caught a cold off the sniffle that the equity release companies had. And so you've now got a situation where that theory of that buildup of moisture with soft cell foam gets tested by HSE, that the information gets published, and actually it shows that, and I know it's a very rough interpretation of the presentation, but 25% of buildings in certain parts of the country with that makeup of foam onto a high resisting underlay may be at risk of moisture buildup. Who wants to take that risk? So
yeah.
Some of the time it's cited as the reason for the fear is because surveyors can't see the timbers behind the foam. For me, that's kind of marginal. There's lots of things that surveyors can have an opinion on where they don't see absolutely everything. And how many surveyors look at a subfloor void and know the condition of the timbers before they'll value, or before they'll allow that to be sold and bought. So that lack of inspection opportunity falls away. But actually, what's real and what's valuable, because as a purchaser of a property, I'd want my surveyor to be looking after my interests and put me on notice of something where I had a 25% risk of failure 10 years down the future. And so, actually, for all the gobbledygook that's talked, and all the the defenses of situations, and the spray foam industry saying that it's not fair and it's disproportionate, that there is a narrative that leads us reasonably to where we are. Whether it's gone too far, whether the pendulum swings too far one way or the other from time to time, that's open to debate, and I'm sure you can ask me questions about that. But I think I've spoken for too long, and you ought to ask me another question.
No, not at all. Actually, it's really interesting hearing that story from where it started, and the change, how the misconceptions might come with it, and all that type of stuff. That's absolutely fascinating. I think it sort of shouts out of common misconceptions, and you potentially see people getting it right or wrong. I'm not the judge on that, but on sort of social media posts online or different news articles. But if you're a surveyor going into a house and you're seeing spray foam, rather than this sort of immediate sort of knee-jerk reaction of oh my god, there's spray foam, we're gonna have to put a 3 on the roof and or give it a bad mortgage valuation. But what are the signs you can look for to see if it's are there signs you can look for to see if there's a good installation and if it's the right the appropriate building for it?
Okay. Yes, of course there are, but how do you do that and make sure that I don't sort of say something stupid that's going to provide somebody with confidence to say something that then later comes back to bite them? So I've got to be careful. So the guidance that's out there, the multi-agency guidance that most people know is the PCA guidance, but it isn't, that sets out a protocol for inspection and investigation, is still as valid as today as it was when it was produced. There's probably some room to do a little bit of tweaking if the Property Care Association wanted to do that, and I think there are some thoughts to do that. But that sets up basically a method of looking at a building and lists the sorts of things that a surveyor ought to be looking at if they're doing an evaluation. And so you're looking at the type of foam, the type of building, and all of that kind of stuff, as well as what it's applied to. And that's really the critical element. It's not necessarily what the foam is, but what it's been applied to and how and why. And so yes, there are a whole bunch of things of that nature. I guess that all of anything that I could say about inspection protocols and how you do it and how you measure it and how you go about actually fundamentally working through that protocol for investigation falls on its bum, really, if a panel surveyor is told, if you see polyurethane foam, protect us, protect yourself, and walk away. So yes, you can potentially go and take a lump of the foam out and look what the underlay is. But yesterday I was with a group of surveyors, and they reminded me very quickly, we don't do destructive tests. We can't go and grab a handful of foam and rip it out and look at what the underlay is. So actually, just at that very basic point of kind of how do you do an investigation, it falls on its bum, because I can't advocate destructive investigations to people doing condition reports. It doesn't work. And you cannot do an evaluation unless you know what's under the foam. Um, what I would say though is if you're looking at very modern buildings, and we're talking about the sort of place I just mentioned, where as part of a fundamental complete rebuild, they were considering how they're going to get both airtightness, thermal performance, and make the MVHR system, the mechanical heat recovery ventilation system, work. Then take the point of view that actually in most of those situations that foam will have been part of the overall design calculations and moisture hydrothermal evaluations that were done by the architect, and it's probably going to be all right. If it is a building that's had, say, for example, an HBC certificate issued on it, NHBC specifically inside those product approval certificates have a requirement, for example, to put a vapor control layer in front of the foam. If you have a vapor control layer in front of the foam, it's going to be okay, because you're not going to get the vapor risk. So there are certain things, particularly with those newer installations, and foam as part of the design brief from the original, concept of the building right through to the point of delivery, where in most of those situations, if the work has been done half well with a decent degree of supervision and some skill and care from the installer, that they are going to be low risk installs. And I guess from some respects, that's the bit that kind of at the moment I understand why consumers are quite irritated by that, because they get a zero valuation. They find somebody like me. I tell them how much it's going to cost to tell them that they know what they've got. And I don't mind taking the PI on, because I was speaking to a surveyor again only a couple of weeks ago that says, how does your PI square that away? I think it's probably the least risky thing that I do. When I'm doing timber and damp investigations and on other things going on in a building, or doing expert witness work, I take the point of view that is much more risky as far as, not knowing, than doing PU foam evaluations on new buildings where everything's there for me to see. And I understand the vapor dynamics of that building because it's all set out for me. So on that sort of thing, I kind of get it. On the older stuff, at the other end of the scale, what I would say is that there's no point in me going out to look at an old house with hard sell polyurethane foam applied directly to the underside of a slate roof or a tile roof, because 99 times out of 100, you're going to be advising a client that you should be making provision for a re-roof because of all the reasons I've just mentioned. The only bits that sit in the grey zone, if you like, are the properties that have had soft cell polyurethane foam applied in the last few years to an unknown underlay. And some of the time, even when you've got a vapor permeable underlay and they've done all the other things like remove the ceiling insulation, so you're not getting temperature inversions in the roof, where they have truly made it a warm roof space, and the ventilation in the occupied spaces below is all good. They're the ones that sometimes I can write a positive report for, that may on first evaluation look as though we aren't going to touch this because it's foam. You can get those over the hump. Unfortunately, there are an awful lot of properties where you've got foam that has been badly installed, so there's gaps in it. It's neither a warm roof nor a cold roof because there are so many holes in the system. There's insulation still left across the, in some cases, and it breaks my heart that I go into roof voids where the first thing I see as I stick my head through the roof is an installation certificate for 275 millimeters of rock wall that was installed under a government scheme, and the installer has happily signed it off, and I know that 275 millimeters of insulation in that roof is going to be absolutely fine to give them the thermal performance that they need. And then I look further up, and then there's a layer of badly installed polyurethane foam above it. Now, that was utterly missold at the point of installation, But often what you'll also find is they're the ones that are at risk, where you're finding at this time of the year high levels of moisture within the foam against the rafters and against the slater's lap. Now, again, I know I'm sat on my soapbox and I'm diatribing here, rattling on, but let's not pretend that roofs don't go into condensation in winter anyway, because they all do, and we shouldn't be concerned of some slightly elevated moisture contents where there's the facility for that to burn off and it to dry out the moment the sun comes out. We get a little bit of thermal gain. The issues really are what happens in some situations where that moisture can become cumulative because the foam is restricting that evaporation and the relative humidities in the roof are sky high because the insulation across the ceiling has cooled the air that's gone into it. It's not removed any moisture. So you've got very cold conditions, very high relative humidities. So the opportunities for the corrections in those high moisture contents are minimized by the makeup of the roof, and they're the ones that are the real problem children, if you like, and there's a lot of them. That's the trouble.
Fine. That's really, really interesting hearing the difference between the ages and installations. I suppose that ties me on to my next question, which is spray foam removal. How often is it that spray foam removal is appropriate, and how often is it sort of, on the older properties that you mentioned, actually just it's time for a new roof, for the reasons you mentioned? Are there many cases where removal is suitable?
Okay, so that's a really good question. I get involved either mostly on the telephone when people are saying, I'm going to have removal. Can you make sure that I'm doing the right thing? Most of the time, they've already made up their mind and they're going to have it taken out because of the bad press or because of whatever, and crack on. If I'm ever in a roof doing an evaluation, the recommendation is you have a high risk job. You have a high risk set of circumstances, but what you have is a low moisture production because there's only two of you rattling around in this great big mausoleum. Then I'll tell them, at some point, you're probably going to be told you have to remove it. But actually, while you're in occupation, living in the way that you do, you haven't got a high risk situation. And so I'll try and talk them down a little bit, put it off for a while. The foam removal stuff is in the most part still driven by a need to do so to satisfy a lender or to satisfy a surveyor. Or the fact that actually an owner is looking after the future interests of the people that they're leaving their house to. And that happens a lot too. So I'll often say, it's a risky installation, but it's a low risk occupation. You can leave it for 5. Don't do anything. Leave it to your kids to sort out. And they will utterly ignore me and say, I want it taken out. Now, is it useful? Yes, it is. Can it be done effectively? Yes, it can, but not always. The one thing that really kind of grates on me is when an installation or a foam removal company will say, we can take this out for you. And they haven't really looked at what's underneath the foam. So, yeah, all right, it's a piece of high vapor resisting underlay. But go and check it out. Don't just take a little bit off to confirm what it is. Find out how fragile it is. Because some of these underlays are really robust and you can take the foam off relatively easily. It'll come off without damaging the underlay. I've also seen installations and also advised people not to do it because actually the underlay is like gossamer. It's just so fragile that that the minute somebody's going to start ripping at that, the felt's going to tear. And so they've spent £5,000 or £6,000 having a foam removal done, only to find that the underfelt is completely knackered, and they're still going to have to replace the roof anyway. So it's not to say that there is no value and you should never remove, because there is a whole bunch of instances where that's the right thing to do. On the flip side, there are a whole bunch where you're going to waste your money and you're just going to save, you'll spend money twice when you only needed to spend it once. Don't get me wrong, if you have to have a re-roof, you're going to have additional cost in both time and labour and waste disposal, but it's far, far, far better to do the job once and do both things at the same time, if that's going to be the obvious end conclusion, the obvious end point anyway. I've come across installations where foam removal is dead easy because the contractors have tried to staple underlay inside a roof that didn't originally have it. That's done all sorts of horrible things to the moisture dynamics and the way that the roof manages its water. And in those circumstances, you can just take the strip of underlay at the top and pull it off at the bottom. You can pull it right down the roof, comes off easily, and all you've got is a waste. Just do it in a day. So there isn't, much as I'm sure you'd like me to. There isn't a yes or no response to your question. Each property really should be evaluated on its merits, and that relies on surveyors understanding what they're doing, clients listening, and also foam removal companies being straight with clients about what their best options are, and roofers also doing that too. The one thing that I have come across, and I have seen it done effectively on occasion, but this is usually with high value buildings with important roof coverings or very expensive roof coverings with hard cell foam, is dry ice removal, and that can be done. It's slow, it's expensive, but it is relatively precise. And if you do need to get, what you can do is you can save otherwise unsalvageable roofing materials. I know that some people have had dry ice removal on hard cell foam simply to get over the hump to sell a house, because actually the roof still might be a bit knackered underneath it, but the mortgage company will cope with that, whereas they won't cope with the presence of the foam. So I do know that some vendors have gone through that process to sell a house that's got a slightly dodgy roof but no foam in place, and that kind of, there's a place for that too.
And just very briefly, what is dry ice removal? Is it a case of effectively freezing the foam so that it chips off? Or?
No, but essentially it's just like grip blasting, but instead of the material that's used to as the aggregate, as the what's the word I'm looking for? Can't think of it. The stuff that does the stripping that comes out of the machine, it's dry ice crystals rather than grit or a carborundum. I can't remember. I can't think of the word. It'll come back to me in a second. But yeah, so that's all it is. So that you're not left with huge amounts of residues of the stripping component after it's done. You are, however, left with a roof full of tiny little bits of sprayed polyurethane foam, which sometimes gets taken out, and in certain circumstances, I've also seen it left in place as well. Now, you could argue that it probably doesn't do very much harm if it's left in place, but bloody hell does it make a mess. I've also seen dry ice stripping where the outside of the roof has changed colour. So because it forces the bits of polyurethane out between the tiles, and you can see the one on the street where they're doing, because it's got a bright yellow roof for a few days until it rains off, putting all that microplastic crap into the water courses. But that's another story, I guess.
Yeah, I was about to say that's another scandal for the future.
Micro polyurethane, yeah, who knows?
Interesting. That's very fascinating. My final question, then, I think, around this topic is spray foam here to stay in its newest format? In terms of, obviously, you've mentioned new builds have it installed in a much different way. Is that going to become more commonplace, or is it? I
have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that polyurethane foam is here to stay. Polyurethane foam is a technology that may well have had have experienced a bump in the road, and that's because, in my view, that both the manufacturers and the installers that vested very heavily, setting yourself up as a polyurethane foam applicator is not a cheap day out. It's big kit, it's big chemistry, it's a lump of investment. And unfortunately, some of the people that made those investments saw this very easy and very quick and apparently, on the face of it, a very profitable, low-risk route to market. And it's not kind of turned out that way. But I think it would be an absolute travesty if what is a really interesting, adaptable, and an extremely useful technology gets dumped or binned or loses its way just because of an incident in its inception when it first really started to come into common parlance. I would not hesitate, and I've said this before public and I'll say it again, I would not hesitate to buy a house where I knew polyurethane foam had been used in the walls or in the roof or in the floor in the correct way, appropriately, with all the right checks and balances, with the right levels of continuity and all the rest of it. Not a moment's hesitation. As I say, an incredibly good product. where I've also seen, and when I was at the Property Care Association, we invited the polyurethane, somebody from a polyurethane foam manufacturer, to explore the uses as a method of controlling water in the ground, because it's fantastic, as part of a waterproofing solution. As have you seen it used to stabilize failing roofs where you've got asbestos fibers in a roof? So it can be used to encapsulate those materials and extend a roof that way. Um, it has ground gas protection. I've seen it used now, and I have a colleague that's using it quite on a regular basis as part of a solution for ground gas protection in new build. So we really ought not, as a construction community, to revile this product. We should embrace it, but actually trust that the manufacturers that are going to bring this stuff to market have learned their lesson.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose with all of the noise then around, like the article that's come out this week around, mortgage providers not taking on properties that have had spray foam and so on. How do you think that conversation starts to turn? Do you think there's more regulation on the way around installation, or is it? I don't know. Are there different conversations going on that you think is going to shape that differently?
Personally, and maybe anybody from the polyurethane industry, either installers or manufacturers, will cringe at this, but I'm allowed to say what I can say now, because I don't have to think about being the CEO of the Property Care Association. But my own view, quite honestly, Matt, is that the installation of polyurethane foam in existing roofs as a retrofit measure is a busted flush. I don't think that's going to come back. I hope it doesn't come back, because actually the work that's necessary to make that right is out of proportion, and the cost of doing the work and the value that you get from it is totally out of proportion with the alternative, which is to install fiberglass across the ceiling. Now, if for example somebody wants to convert their roof into a room, then polyurethane foam comes back into the fray again, but protected properly by vapor barriers as you build out that room. So if you're reusing that space, it's great. But I honestly think it's probably a busted flush in respect to trying to apply an insulating product to the periphery of a building, where actually you don't need to do that. And actually the most effective, cost-effective and efficient way of doing it is insulating close to the occupied space at ceiling level, and let the roof do what the roof was always supposed to do, which was get wet and dry out, which is get warm and get cold and be ventilated or a bit scabby from time to time, but it sorts itself out. Leave that alone. So I don't necessarily think that actually these calls for regulation on that have there's no point in it, because actually the confidence from the consumer has gone in respect to that. And so what we're bringing in legislation to protect, that's not there. And so, if there needs to be regulation at all, and the observation of existing regulation, it's about, making sure as we move forward and we adapt our buildings and make them more thermally efficient, that we do that in a way that is truly sustainable, where we're using materials that don't have an effect on future generations, and actually using techniques that don't cause those buildings that are ultimately terribly sustainable to be compromised by what we're doing. So on that whole kind of retrofit and energy performance piece, I don't think we've got an issue. As far as using polyurethane foam in other areas, they'll be subject to the same the same levels of regulation as any other construction material, and that's the world of that is currently in flux and is changing rapidly with the Building Safety Act. So we're all going to have to get used to more regulation about product specification and how we use them, and where they're safe and where they're not.
And also when you're surveying, identifying where those things eventually have, when you're seeing them, have been done correctly and haven't been. So yeah, it's a whole new challenge, but that's been fascinating to cover. Thank you very much for coming on. Do you run any courses around spray foam, and if people want to learn more?
Yeah, I can, and I can deliver training to small groups, and I do that. I guess the regular gig is I do a course for the Property Care Association. I think there's one scheduled for February, So if you are an individual surveyor that wants to do something on PU foam and you want a day out, I do a day through them. That's it's a couple of £100 for the day. It's a nice little relaxed workshop. Lots of practicals and hands-on. We all get a feel for it, and we kind of get to look at it, and we talk about our experiences. And it sounds like a bit of a self-help group. It's slightly more than that, but it's actually I think a pretty kind of interesting day out. So if people are interested, as an individual, certainly have a look at the PCA website and go towards that. If there are small groups, then I'm happy to come out and visit people and bring a car full of scabby spray foam and rotten wood, and we can have a day looking at how we evaluate it and how you can go about sort of being slightly more relaxed about making decisions on whether it's good and it's bad, because that's the aim really, is to give people the ability to be able to help consumers and provide them with reliable information rather than just saying, no, can't deal with it, run away. There's a few quid in it as well. Who knows how long that kind of income stream is going to come from polyurethane foam evaluation. It's not going to last forever. But at the moment, I can't meet the demand that I'm facing, I'll tell you that much.
Awesome. And you've got a real passion for it, so it's been a pleasure to chat about it. So
I don't know. I don't know. Passion.
Well, it comes across like that.
It ignites me. Passion's best left in the bedroom, I think. But an overused term. But it is an interesting subject. There's a lot to learn, and why shouldn't it engage one? Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. No, thank you very much for coming on, and I look forward to catching up again soon.